Many of you have heard about the ketogenic diet. It's a buzzword these days, in particular in cancer circles, but also when dealing with potential weight loss. I'm Kirstin Nussgruber from Kirstin'sCancerCare.com, and let me share in a nutshell tonight with you, because this is quite an extensive topic and I'm trying to condense a lot of information in a very short 10 minutes. But I really want you to walk away with some nuggets of information here that might clarify whether the ketogenic diet is something that you should pursue or not. Are there risks involved? Are there benefits to the ketogenic diet? So my main focus is, of course, on using it in a cancer care environment. But I'll touch on why for weight loss this can be a beneficial diet too. But let me just start off by saying a ketogenic diet is a therapeutic diet, and that is something that we need to be incredibly mindful of. It is not a diet for anybody, and in general, I actually do not like the word diet because it means that you are forcing yourself to be or eat in a certain way, in a very restrictive way for a certain period of time, and you're not necessarily learning how to live like that long term. So people say to me, can I eat or can I pursue a ketogenic diet long term? And the answer to that is pretty simple. What are you using the ketogenic diet for? And let's analyze, what is a ketogenic diet? What does that actually mean? Because there are really two trends when we're looking at the ketogenic diet. So if we're looking at it from a purely therapeutic point of view, then you are pursuing a ketogenic diet because you are wanting to change the way your body uses energy. So right now, the way all our cells use energy that fuel everything that we do is by using glucose. And we get that mainly, sugars, we get that type of sugar mainly from consuming carbohydrates. Now, in the ketogenic diet, if we pursue that in the real traditional way, we have to force the energy metabolism to change into a form called ketosis. And that is a metabolic change that can take some time in the body, and that needs to be then closely monitored and maintained over a period of, well, forever really, because you need to stay in this energy pathway that is not normal to the body in the way we are trying to pursue it. So instead of using glucose, your cells use ketones, and ketones are produced when your body breaks down fat. So when we're moving into a ketogenic diet, what we are really doing is we are forcing the body into a fat adaptation phase, meaning that instead of getting energy from carbs and glucose, we're going to be getting energy from fats. So what that implies in terms of what we put on our plate is, yes, absolutely, we are going to now suddenly rely on eating a lot more fat. And of course, this is healthy fat coming from whole food sources. That's needless to say that. But nevertheless, that is something that is not really normal for your body. So you're kind of forcing it on your body, and that can take some time until we get into that stage, that fat adaptation stage. And we also need to be incredibly mindful about the risks that are potentially associated with that. So I'll deal a little bit with that later. Why do you think so? Well, of course, if you are now changing how the body fuels itself, that needs to be maintained, number one. And number two, you need to have a whole chain reaction happening in the body, that it needs to be able to metabolize all that fat and still keep you healthy. So when it comes to weight loss, of course, that makes sense. You think, wow, I'm going to be losing fat, my stored fat. And there is truth to that, because that's where the body goes. If you're not feeding your body carbohydrates, which convert to glucose, and you are going through a fat adaptation phase and your body now needs fat, it will look for it in stored sources in your body. And that, of course, is your fatty tissue. So that can start to break down. And once your stored fat reserves and basically stored glucose, which you can find in fat and you can also find it in your liver, once those have been used up, then the body starts looking for other fuels that it can use, and that would be fat, ketones from the fat that we ingest. So again, we need to be pretty mindful of what we're actually doing to the body here on a ketogenic diet. And this is not something that you quickly hop on and you see a result with in a week or two, even a month. This is something that really needs to be carefully monitored. If you are following through 100% and you want to get to the ketosis, and that is something that we need to measure on a regular basis through urine. It can be measured, or through a finger prick, similar to what diabetics would do when they have to test their blood glucose levels as well. We do the same thing because we want to stay in ketosis, and that management phase that comes after this fat adaptation phase, where the body gets adapted to using fat for fuel and not glucose anymore, because we're not eating glucose anymore. We obviously have to do that. So once we are in this fat metabolism stage, we need to maintain that. So we want to obviously keep the body in ketosis, and that we do through our food choices, through making sure that we don't ingest glucose. Now, one very important question that I sometimes get asked is, how do we eradicate glucose from the body? And there's a bit of a misconception here, because we don't ever not have glucose in our bodies. In fact, there are certain organs that rely on glucose even if we are fat adapted already and we are in ketosis. Our red blood cells fall into that category. Part of our brain, although the brain can adapt to using ketones, but part of it still needs glucose. And then also part of our kidney still needs glucose. So you think, well, is that going to fuel cancer cells if I'm doing it for that purpose? And the answer is no. The levels of glucose that we get through a biochemical reaction in the body called gluconeogenesis, which happens in the liver, is not going to be enough to fuel the body. It's just going to be enough to fuel those vital organs that I just mentioned earlier to you to keep going. So, but understand that there's always going to be some form of glucose in your body, albeit not enough to provide the fuel and the energy, as long as we don't ingest it, because then we switch the body over again into the other mechanism, which is the more normal. I have to be careful if I say normal state, because it can be argued that the other state is normal too. Anyway, the state that we are generally adapted to, which means we're using glucose for fuel. When it comes to cancer, there is mounting research and evidence that is showing that maintaining a state of ketosis and using ketones for fuel can be beneficial to shrink certain tumor growth, because what we have done with this metabolic process is we've switched the way a cell uses energy. And cancer cells are pretty basic. They cannot switch over like healthy cells would be able to do. So they are struggling, and they cannot use ketones for fuel. However, it's just not that simple, because there are some tumor cells that are actually able to use ketones for their fuel, for their growth and development as well. So the research is still going on. Papers are out there. We can find them. However, we just need to understand that it's just not as clean and as straightforward as we would like it to be. So we really need to understand our tumor environment of the actual cancer that we have to see, does it actually drive on ketones? Are we actually adding fuel to the fire by going onto a ketogenic diet? Now, a lot of the research that focuses on where a ketogenic diet is most effective has been on brain tumors, and we have seen that it can, in fact, shrink brain tumors if it's used also in conjunction with conventional treatments. So that seems to be the stance right now in the integrative oncology environment, is that in conjunction with conventional treatments, a ketogenic diet can be beneficial for those cells that use glucose to fuel themselves, because you're switching that over. Those cells that use ketones, of course, that is not very effective. But some other interesting research that is really also exciting in the cancer arena is what has been shown is that the state of ketosis, that means if we are in that fat adapted stage and our body uses ketones or not glucose for fuel, it's not just the so-called Warburg effect, which was when it was proven, this is over 100 years ago, by the way, that cancer cells use glucose to fuel themselves. But what has also been shown is that a state of ketosis can actually cause oxidative stress to cancer cells, to very specific cancer cells, making them more receptive to conventional treatments, in particular chemotherapy and radiation. So we are desensitizing cancer cells to the effects of these treatments, which of course is really good news. And that's why what I do with my clients is I urge them to do some fasting before they get their treatments, because what you're doing is you're withdrawing the glucose, right? And you are desensitizing cancer cells to the effectiveness of the treatments. And that is really in someone who cannot fully be in ketosis and fully follow a ketogenic diet, but at least we can do that. And that leads me on to the whole fasting side of it, because anyone on a ketogenic diet needs to also incorporate some form of fasting. It just goes hand in glove with this approach. And one very basic way of fasting that we can all really do is called intermittent fasting, and we can do that overnight. So the research shows that we do need to have a minimum of 13 hours of fasting, meaning we do not consume any solid foods. We are allowed to consume liquid foods, or drink, in other words, liquids, clear liquids, but 13 hours or longer. And some people take it up to, say, 16 hours of fasting. And then in the 8 hours that are left in a 24-hour cycle day, that's when you're allowed to eat. And of course, it depends what you eat in those 8 hours. That is going to really determine whether you are easily able to adapt to this period of fasting. And you absolutely are. So, but it needs to be done under supervision. And it also needs to be done with an understanding of the body. So, questions are also asked, what else influences glucose levels? So if I'm adopting a ketogenic diet to not produce glucose that adds fuel to the fire, what we have to consider, though, is what other maybe external factors can also contribute to a rise in our blood glucose levels. So before we embark on a ketogenic diet for the purposes of ketosis, is we need to understand our body. And in particular, we need to understand our blood glucose levels. What's going on? Do we have lingering inflammation? Do we have anything else going on? Do we have any kind of form of internal injury? What are our fasting glucose levels? Are we pre-diabetic? Because that can be an issue here if we actually are even diabetes 1 or diabetes 2. For example, a diabetes 1 patient who embarks on a ketogenic diet can get into a state which is called ketoacidosis. Now you think, I just mentioned ketosis. This is something different. So ketosis, again, is the state where we have adapted the body, we have fat adapted the body to use ketones for fuel, it's part of fat, and not glucose. Ketoacidosis is a life-threatening condition that is associated with diabetes 1 patients that simultaneously have high glucose levels as well as high ketone levels in their blood. And that can actually lead to severe liver and kidney damage. It can be life-threatening. So this leads me on to the risks. We need to be incredibly mindful, again, what goes on in our body. Blood glucose levels can rise through external factors such as stress or lack of sleep, because what does that do? Constant exposure to stress or constant perception of stress, as well as a regular lack of sleep, can lead to our stress hormones shooting up. And what does that do? That signals to the liver to release glucose, because glucose can be stored in the liver. And it can set glucose free. So you can, if you are constantly stressed, if you are an insomniac, you can have elevated blood sugar levels without touching a carbohydrate. Even if you are, you could be having elevated blood glucose levels and you're wondering what's going on. Why am I not maintaining the state of ketosis that I'm trying to achieve? So again, it's an all-out lifestyle scenario as well. And we just need to understand what are all the other factors that can contribute to our blood sugar levels in the body. when we're trying to manage them and reduce them. Now, the risk factors or certain risk areas that we really need to be mindful of, if you think we are having a higher fat diet, and a ketogenic diet consists of about minimum of 65 to even 75% of fat, a small amount of protein, because again, protein can also be converted to glucose. So certain amino acids can be converted to glucose by the liver. So if we eat too much protein, even on a ketogenic diet, then we are in turn, again, fueling the body with glucose. So again, we need to be mindful of this. All right. So the ratio of fat protein needs to be about 3 or 4 times fat to 1 portion of protein. So let's keep that in mind too. And then, of course, the amount of carbs that we're supposed to be consuming. And here I'm talking whole food carbs coming from more starchy vegetables. I'm not talking about pastas and anything produced with flour or with even refined flour. I'm talking about the carbohydrates that are naturally occurring in certain of the vegetables. It's about 20 to 60 grams a day. So we're severely reducing that. So health risks, I'm not quite done with that yet. We are relying a lot on fat. That means our liver needs to be functioning, because a lot of the fat reserves and the way fat is processed and the way fat is being metabolized happens in the liver. So what are our liver enzymes? Normal blood work can tell you that, but you need to know what is the state of your liver. And are there conditions where you are absolutely not supposed to be doing a ketogenic diet? Absolutely. So if you have liver cancer, for example, you will be able to process all the fat. We need to be very mindful. If you have any gallbladder issues, same thing here. We need bile. It stores bile, but if we don't have that, well, again, we have a tool in fat metabolism that is missing. If we have any issues with our gastrointestinal tract, if we've had gastric bypass surgery, we need to be careful. If we're having chronic constipation, maybe we're on pain medication, those opioids, and many of us cancer patients are on chronic pain medication. If we have chronic constipation, we can't go on a ketogenic diet. We need to sort that out first. If we have any issues with our kidney, same thing. We need to be extremely mindful. I need to be very careful with a ketogenic diet. So this has to be started under supervision if you are doing it the way it's really with the end goal in mind, that is putting yourself in a state of ketosis, which even when we manage that, remember, can fluctuate. So we need to really get in tune with our bodies here. Are there other issues with a ketogenic diet? Well, think about it. We are focusing on a lot of fat. So a lot of that fat will contain saturated fats as well. So again, we need to be a little bit mindful here about how is that affecting our fat metabolism, our cholesterol levels. Again, liver function is closely tied to that as well. But also we're focusing on low carb vegetables and fruits. So the fruits are very, very narrowed down. Basically, on a true ketogenic diet, you're only consuming berries, lemons and limes, and not even a green apple or any there. That's kind of out as well. So it's a very restricted diet, cutting out a lot of the cancer prevention vegetables and fruits that we hear about, read about, the very colorful vegetables as well. And it can be incredibly bland and restrictive because we're having so few options. We also then, with the protein intake, need to make sure that those sources are super, super, super clean. So it can't come from conventional sources because they just won't do, unfortunately, because then we're adding to the toxic burden, which again is a burden to the liver. So you can see there are many moving parts that need to be considered. Is the ketogenic diet right for me? You can also come up with a compromise. You can eat keto style, low carb keto style, which means that you're not necessarily making sure that you get to ketosis and stay in ketosis, but you are just generally reducing your carb intake, eating moderate amounts of protein, not too much, moderate amounts of protein, and obviously trying to increase the fiber content as well. And just by doing that, people have really lost weight and have been able to keep that weight off because it's kind of a natural progression. And it's just simple changes of lifestyle and diet. So from a weight loss point of view, that might also be an option for you. For cancer patients, it needs to be done under supervision. I really urge you to do that. And if you are considering doing full-out ketogenic diet for weight loss, again, have yourself monitored, get a full blood work done on you. You want to know what are your insulin levels like, your fasting insulin glucose levels like, what are your liver enzymes like. You just need to know the baseline, so that you kind of know from what platform you're starting off from, that you don't have lingering inflammation going on. If you are immunocompromised, the same thing. Just make sure that this is actually safe for your body to process the full-blown ketogenic diet with ketosis in the end. And then the question of whether this is sustainable long-term, well, the jury is out there. I think it's a process for each of us as we move into this kind of situation of adapting our bodies, and we have to adapt our lifestyles. Again, I mentioned before stress, our perception of stress. In other words, the stress factor that is our trigger might not necessarily be this big bang event in your life. It might just be how you perceive stress. For somebody else, that might be not even a cause for stress, but for you it is. You need to become aware of this, because that can elevate your hormone levels. So that's another good baseline test that you really should be doing, is where are my stress hormone levels? Where are my cortisol levels? And best done through a saliva test over four times a day. You check that, because our cortisol levels fluctuate. So that needs to be monitored as well. So please, I urge you, this is not just a trendy diet to try out. It is a therapeutic diet, and you need to be in full understanding of your body systems and where you stand before you embark on a full-blown ketogenic diet, and reduce your risks of adding further complications that could potentially be avoided. I hope this was of interest to you. It's a very long and complicated topic that I really condensed into a short period of time. My website, KirstinScancerCare.com, I post a lot of information there. The recipes on there are not necessarily only ketogenic, because again, I serve an audience. Not all of us can do the ketogenic diet. So it really is a very bio-individual approach that I have. Have a look there. There's some interesting blogs you can find too. I've also published a book, and you can download a free chapter if you go to my website, again, KirstinScancerCare.com. Have a look there. And if you want an assessment call to see if the two of us could work together and I can coach you with some nutritional and lifestyle changes, you can book a consultation through my website as well, KirstinScancerCare.com. And I hope to see you there at some point. So take care for now, and good night.